Welcome to Leader You by Black River Performance Management, where we believe work should fuel the human spirit, not drain it. In this leadership podcast, we will dive into the lived experiences of people flourishing in today's workplace and beyond. Join us to hear real-life examples of experiences from our own lives and from the leaders we know and trust. Thank you for joining the Leader You podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing George Pitagorsky. He brings over 50 years of personal experience applying mindfulness, yoga, servant leadership orientation, and systems and process thinking to help individuals, teams, and organizations to perform optimally. He's a master coach, facilitator, and consultant. He shares insights, tools, and techniques in his articles and books. The Zen approach to project management, managing conflicts in projects, managing expectations, a mindful approach to achieving optimal performance, and how to be happy even when you're sad, mad, or scared. Through his decades-long career, George has played roles as a globally recognized project, program, and process management expert, teacher, speaker, coach, and executive. He's been a CIO for a multi-billion-dollar government agency, a principal in 2 technology startups, an executive director of program development for an international learning organization, and an executive manager and consultant in large-scale IT systems, implementation, organizational change, and process improvement programs across multiple industries. What a wisdom well we have with us today. Thank you so much for being on the show today, George. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast again. Today, we're going to be discussing your new book, The Peaceful Warrior's Path. I'm halfway through it, and I'm loving the exercises, and I'm enjoying what I'm learning. I'm not reading it like a typical book that you would just go from the front to the back, but more as a workbook. And so I'm really taking my time and working my way through and really being intentional about stopping and finding out what some of those things mean in the book and the exercises that you can do. And I'm really just enjoying it. So thank you for being on the show today. I'm excited to bring the book to our listeners and also have you explain the story of, how you came to write this book and how you help people optimally live their lives.
Well, thanks for having me. And the book, I call it a guidebook or a workbook. And it is really, some people can read it cover to cover, but I've been getting feedback that says that most people figure that they're going to take months for it to get from the beginning to the end. So how did I come to write this book? Well, I came to write it as a result of over 50 years worth of experience with these concepts that I'm putting forth and the exercises and techniques that I've been using to integrate a combination of yogic and Buddhist and Western psychological concepts into the realm of day-to-day living. Mm-hmm. And what I've found is that many people are getting in their own way with regard to being optimally well and living in a way that allows them to perform as effectively and as possible given their condition. So I took 50 years to write this book.
Right, lots of experience and wisdom, right?
Yeah. So it's not theoretical at all. It's really based on experience, and not only my experience, but I have many quotes in the book that are coming from different perspectives.
Yeah,
on
I love
how
that.
to live.
Yeah, I love that you bring. There's a lot of quotes. The Dalai Lama, Jesus. There's just so many in there that, and you have a lot of research-based practices and things in there that which is nice because you could go read the article. This is on Harvard Business Review, or this is from, Tasha Eurich, self-awareness. Like, I love that you put those references in there too, so people could actually go down that rabbit hole if they wanted to learn a little bit more.
Indeed, yes. Yeah, that's basically my purpose, was to give this as a kind of an entry point
Yeah,
for doing work on oneself and taking the role of a peaceful warrior.
I love it. And so, for our listeners who are interested in in being a peaceful warrior, let's talk about the book and how you framed it up. Like it is like a workbook. I love the wellness wheel and how you've put it into the categories of optimal wellness. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yes, yes. The wellness wheel is basically identifying 8 factors or 8 facets of wellness, and they include certainly physical wellness, as well as emotional wellness, relationship, financial wellness, and so forth. Psychological wellness. The point of it is to recognize that when we talk about wellness, it's not just one thing. It's
Right.
really a combination. And part of the theme of the book is how do we put together a whole series of techniques and concepts and so forth to address this thing that we call wellness.
Hmm.
And so I didn't make up the wellness wheel. It's
Yeah.
something that I've attributed to to whoever it is that authored it, whose name is not in my head at this point in time. I should say.
Yeah, there's many of them out there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but I think that the essence of it is that we almost universally as people want to be as well as possible.
Absolutely.
And that means that we have to find what is keeping us from that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And once we find it, we have to have the courage and persistence and patience, which are the attributes of a warrior, really,
Yeah.
to and skill to cut through those obstacles,
Right. And one of the
get them out.
obstacles you talk about is self-imposed suffering.
Yes,
And you want to talk about what some of those examples, and I think this is super important for our listeners because oftentimes the actual forces are the obstacles are inside of us. They're not actually out in the world. We are the mountain, right?
exactly. Yeah, our conditioning, our belief systems, our psychological, the results of our upbringing, and all of this have led us to a place where, in many cases, we are getting in our own way.
Hmm.
And how does that happen? Well, for one thing, one of the main themes is how we can cut through attachment,
Hmm.
clinging. So we cause ourselves unnecessary suffering by holding on to things that we can't hold on to,
Hmm.
pushing away things that can't be pushed away. So the end result is that we need to cultivate this quality of being acceptance, and to be able to let go.
Hmm.
And not to do that in a passive way, because some people, when they hear accept and let go, it's basically there's a kind of a nihilistic, passive. Oh, I'm just going to let everything happen as it happens. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability to let go. First of all, to accept what it is that is. We
Hmm.
accept the present moment. We can't change the present moment.
Right.
We can't change the past,
Hmm.
but we can influence the future.
Hmm.
And at the same time that we can influence the future, we don't have control over it.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
we have control over our own performance, our own behavior, to the degree that we have cut through some of the conditioning that keeps us from actually doing that.
Hmm.
And now we have the ability to let go into what I call flow,
Hmm.
flow with a capital F. So that is this capacity to let our experience, to let our knowledge and skills to come to the surface, and without getting in the way of them,
Hmm.
to perform. and to
Absolutely.
perform as effectively and optimally as possible.
I love that. You use the dropping into the river analogy as far as letting go, and I love that. In fact, I've used it in a different way, but I want to have you share it. But I've used it in a different way where I've thought of swimming upstream, like against the current.
Mhm.
And one of my friends told me, when you stop struggling, you float.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So exactly.
So can you
If
explain what you're like the dropping into the river and clinging to a branch? Can you give that analogy?
Yeah. So the story is basically that there's someone hanging from a tree branch overhanging a rushing river,
Hmm.
and there's no way for them to get back to the tree to climb down and all of that. They're stuck. If they hold on, what happens is they get tired,
Hmm.
and because they're tired, ultimately they have to let go. And by that time, they drop into the river and they get carried away because they don't have the energy anymore
Hmm.
to do anything.
Right.
So if they let go before they get to the point where they have to let go, they now have the energy to at least try to survive in this rushing river.
Hmm.
So certainly, if they're skillful and clever, they're not going to swim against the current.
Hmm.
They're going to swim with the current and maybe across the current to get to the other shore where there's a small beach or what have you.
Hmm.
And they have to recognize that they might not reach that other place.
Hmm.
But there's a good chance that they can if they're, decent swimmers and they can avoid the stones and all of the stuff that's in the way. And they are optimally performing.
Yes.
They're using their energy in this way, but they're not necessarily just floating.
Right.
As you said before, if you're swimming against the current and you stop doing that, then you're floating
Hmm.
for a moment.
Hmm.
But when you realize that if you just float, you're going to be swept down down the river and down the
Hmm.
waterfall and smash into whatever is below that.
Yep.
So now you're floating, you're present and centered.
Hmm.
You're no longer panicking. You're no longer trying to do something that is unskillful, like swimming against the current.
Hmm.
And now you have the opportunity to do what is appropriate for the situation.
Absolutely. I actually had an experience in the river this last year where our boat capsized and we were this exact scenario. We actually found a place to get out of the water in the middle of the river. But as I reflect back on that, we were being skillful in the way of not trying to hang on to anything, but to try to get up onto something and then wait and to call for help and things like that and to be skillful. But one of the people in the boat was out in the water and we were watching him and was he going to be able to keep his footing and, having boots and fishing gear and all the things on provides its own challenges. It's not like you can just swim with those things on, right? And
Right.
so, so just trying to be skillful about and this is just comes to life. Like this is how life happens. And sometimes, we have to surrender to the way this is happening right now. And this is getting all panicky is not going to help the situation at all. It's more about, like you said, staying calm in the storm, in the center, in this life-threatening situation. Staying as calm as possible was the best thing that all of us did do, is try to figure out what is the next indicated right step. What can we do?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And this idea of surrender, just another term for accepting.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically, okay, what can I do at this point, other than to surrender and then be in a position to choose the next step?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
love that analogy. Freedom, you talk about freedom from self-imposed suffering, and I think there's so many exercises in this book that will help people to understand like some of the beliefs and mental models that they have Do you want to talk a little bit about beliefs? One of the quotes I do have that you talked about beliefs that I really loved was that beliefs can provide a sense of certainty as a way of hiding from the truth.
Yes, so this is actually a relatively controversial issue because many people have beliefs that are that they're so identified with that they no longer think of them as being beliefs.
Their truths in
They
their
think
mind,
of
right?
them as being, this is the truth, this is the way things are, when in fact there may not be any evidence of that.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that if we have beliefs and don't question their validity, and we don't question the way that they affect our lives. So, for example, if I believe something that ultimately has a negative effect on my behavior, I believe that one type of person is not as good as another type of person, and I might have tremendous argument to support that belief. And it leads me to not be able to be in an effective relationship with that type of person. Might be an individual, might be a family member.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I'm now not living optimally. My
Mm-hmm.
relationships aren't as effective and well as they could be. And
Mm-hmm.
other aspects of my life are not as well. So the message in this book around beliefs is question them.
Mm-hmm.
Don't necessarily throw them out
Mm-hmm.
because they might be useful,
Mm-hmm.
and see how they are affecting your mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So mindset is a term that I use, and it has to do with the sum total of our beliefs, our mental models, the way that we think that the world operates, and our emotional conditioning, and all of that is summed up as a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So some people, and there are different styles of mindset. Some of them are optimistic. Some people have an optimistic mindset. Some people have a pessimistic mindset, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So what we say is know that your mindset and the beliefs within it are driving your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And your behavior includes what you say and what you do.
Mm-hmm.
It also is affecting the way you feel.
For sure.
So if you have a belief that doing some action is detrimental and you're a bad person because you do that, and you don't have any control over doing it because it's a habit or it's an addiction of some sort, you're causing yourself unnecessary suffering.
Mm-hmm.
When you realize that that scenario is taking place, you have the opportunity now to cut through. First, accept the fact that you are stuck
Mm-hmm.
for the moment,
Yeah.
and then see if you can do anything about it. So a lot of the exercises in the book are about how to create the circumstances that will allow you to take action in a skillful way.
Yes, I love the exercises and the questions that you put in there. I like I said, it's a workbook. And I think it should be a workbook because it is inner work that has to be done. We live in a society that's completely based on everything external and success scripts and outside in, where the work that needs to be done to have the peace is inside out.
Yes, yes, exactly. And when we recognize that it is our inner workings, this inside out approach, then we have much more control over the world
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
than we do if we think that everything is coming into us and we have to react to it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So we cultivate that capacity to first be able to recognize what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a significant centering on mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
in the book. Mindfulness gives us the ability, as we cultivate more and more of it, to recognize what's happening, to objectively observe and recognize what's happening.
Yep.
As we do that, we have self-awareness. the ability to see what we're doing, why we're doing it, who we are, what we think we are, and all of that is now cultivated by our ability to step back and find a place where we can objectively observe.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about in the mindfulness and the self-awareness piece, you bring in the part about ego and it being a good thing. And so could you explain how your ego can serve you and how it can be part of your self-imposed suffering?
So the ego is there. I mean, if we're alive and we're living in the in the world, and even if we're in a cave someplace, the ego is present.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically the sum total of all of our learning and our identification with the ability to perform in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So in that respect, it's a very useful thing. If you didn't have your ego, you wouldn't be on, leading a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
We wouldn't be able to do anything. We would be, just empty. So, and being empty is not such a bad thing, but still, we need to live in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that aspect, and we're saying, okay, the ego is this useful tool, if you will. What happens is that the ego starts to take over. We view the ego as equivalent to who we are. We identify with it.
Mm-hmm.
When we do that, everything becomes about feeding the ego. The ego wants to be fed.
Mm-hmm.
So we're continuously feeding the ego. We're protecting the ego from all of these things that might happen to it. And that causes us suffering. We cling to things that we like. We push away things that the ego doesn't like.
Mm-hmm.
We ignore things that, for the moment at least, are neutral to the ego.
Mm-hmm.
So the approach is to cultivate mindfulness so that you can stand behind the ego, see it for what it is, and identify not with it, but with the awareness that is observing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is conceptual, but as one practices mindfulness, and as one has an increasingly accurate understanding of what this awareness means, becomes a natural, experiential thing to have as a central theme in one's life.
Mm-hmm.
Then the ego can be utilized in a very highly effective way, much more effective than if I'm being reactive,
Mm-hmm.
much more effective than if I'm thinking that, something that is really a constantly changing, constantly influenced by external and internal factors is going to be solid and stand there and not change, then I'm going to suffer. Because the reality is that everything is in the midst of change.
Yeah. Always. We're changing all the time. We're not the same person at any given point. That you're not the same person you were 3 months ago with your cellular makeup, right?
Exactly. So, with respect to the ego, there's a quote in the book that actually came to me again today because we had this earthquake in near New York City. And the quote is, "The bad news is that you're falling through the air. Nothing to hang on to, no parachute. The good news is that there's no ground."
Yeah, that is a good quote.
And I would add to that, not only is there no ground, but whatever you think is falling into it is also empty. So even if there was a ground, there would be nothing to smash into it. But since there is no ground, since everything is constantly changing and constantly in a state of movement, then we can let go of a lot of the clinging to this solidity that keeps us from really being effective in the world.
Mm-hmm. A lot easier said than done, isn't it?
Say this again?
A lot easier said than done, isn't it?
A lot easier said than done.
Right.
And I think I bring this out in the book that a big part of this process that I talk about has to do with patience and compassion for oneself.
Mm-hmm.
That it's a difficult task
Mm-hmm.
to let go of the clinging, to let go of belief,
Mm-hmm.
to change a habit,
Oh yeah, it takes a lot of courage and a lot of
courage.
work
Exactly,
and
exactly. So,
self-awareness. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And then while it takes a lot of courage, a lot of persistence, a lot of effort, skill, and
Mm-hmm.
so forth, part of the game is to relax into it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where acceptance comes
Mm-hmm.
in.
Mm-hmm.
So we more and more try to find that place within that is always calm, peaceful, relaxed,
In flow.
and operate from there.
Yeah. When
And
you
we might find that place for a couple of minutes, a couple of seconds, and then it goes away and we're back in habitual, reactive behavior.
mm-hmm.
But if we have cultivated mindfulness, we recognize that. And the moment we recognize it, we're back.
Mm-hmm. And it
And it's a
happens quicker and
continuous,
quicker. It starts to happen quicker and quicker, or more and more times
exactly.
the more you
More and
practice
more
it.
times, quicker,
Mm-hmm.
and lasts longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And it's a life's work.
it is.
It's a life's work. And I also want to add that while it's a life's work, it doesn't require being born into, these concepts.
No.
A student of mine who's just passed, 89 years old. I started working with him when he was in his, I guess, late 70s, maybe
Mm-hmm.
10, 15 years ago. And at that time, he was like extremely reactive. He
Mm-hmm.
was like angry. And he had a lot of physical conditions that, the normal person would be angry about. He would yell at people coming too close to him in the street,
Mm-hmm. Right.
and he was a curmudgeon. And, a lovable curmudgeon, but
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't want to get in his way.
Right.
And I saw him change
Mm-hmm.
to the point where he was able to relax into an extremely difficult physical situation without the clinging and the baggage of anger and remorse and all of that.
Yeah. That's beautiful when you can see that kind of transformation.
Yeah.
And
And he started transforming in his 70s.
yeah, it's never too late. That's a mindset, right? We're never too old or too young to start anything. That's a mindset thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. I like to say age is mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
Exactly. Exactly. That's a perfect one. Yeah.
Uh,
Yes. So, yeah, I guess part of the message is don't mind. It's like
yeah,
accept it. This is what it is.
it is
Be
what it is.
happy.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
And surrendering. And so one of the other concepts that you talk about in beliefs is burning the boat. Do you want to explain what that means?
Yes. So we look at these concepts and techniques as being a boat
Mm-hmm.
that will take us from where we are to where we want to be. And that boat is still set in beliefs. There's quite a possibility of becoming attached to it. But now we reach the so-called other shore.
Mm-hmm.
We're now able to operate naturally without doing anything other than being who we are
Mm-hmm.
in a way that is in keeping with with what we're talking about. So we reach that point and we don't need the boat anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The boat has done its job. So we burn the boat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, don't burn the boat too early, because if you do, you're going to be stuck wherever the boat has been burned. It's like your boat capsized in the middle of the river. You don't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it brings out the paradoxes.
Mm-hmm.
It brings out the uncertainty, and the ability to live in the notion that eventually you won't need to practice. The boat is, in part, in great part, our practices, our meditation practices, our beliefs, and so forth. We need those in order to operate. But the we that needs them is ego.
Mm-hmm.
And Trungam Trungpa Rinpoche, who was the author of that quote about there's no ground, he wrote a book called Spiritual Materialism,
Mm-hmm.
pointing out how the ego will grab hold of even the most spiritual, the most effective teachings of how to meditate and all of this stuff, and use it as a way of reinforcing the ego.
Mm.
So we want to use those functions, those capabilities that we have, the techniques and the tools, and constantly question whether or not we need to hold on to them in any way.
Yeah.
My teacher Ram Dass, he would talk about being cooked. You're being cooked as you do these practices, and at some point you're done.
Stick a fork in me, right? Yes.
Exactly.
I'm
So
done.
when you're done, there's this quality of no longer needing.
Yeah.
Everything is already integrated. And it doesn't mean that you'll stop meditating or you'll stop believing in a certain thing. It's just integrated. And you've questioned it enough to realize that it is a useful part of your process.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not, that's when you burn the boat?
If it's not, then you give it up and you find something else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You give it up, you throw that away.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the analogy of the boat doesn't necessarily fully cover that aspect,
Mm-hmm.
but what you're doing is you're constantly questioning what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. And I didn't know.
And what the end result of it is.
Yeah, I see that, and I had no way to really explain that, and I like the way that you explained it, and it gave me a little bit more insight by hearing it that way. So thank you for sharing that. And it might not make sense to the listeners that haven't read it, but to me that really just kind of resonated. So thank you for that. I also didn't know that Ram Dass was your teacher.
Yes, he was probably the most influential teacher that came into my life.
Wow.
I met him back in the early 1970s.
Wow. Do you want to share a little more on that?
Well, he was quite a character. For those who don't know who Ram Dass was, his given name before he became Ram Dass was Richard Alpert.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a very accomplished psychologist and a professor at Harvard who began to study the impact of psychedelics on the mind and on one's capacity to live effectively in the world.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that he and some of the people that he worked with went off and put themselves into a situation where they were just using psychedelics
Mm-hmm.
to experiment with their minds. And because they were both students and professors at Harvard, they caused disruption and were
Mm-hmm.
ultimately fired.
Mm-hmm.
So Ram Dass ends up going to India and finds a guru.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, now sees that the psychedelics, the substances are not necessary.
Mm-hmm.
But what is necessary is the capacity to, as we've been saying, let go of whatever it is that's causing you to hold on,
Mm-hmm.
to let go into the ocean of love.
Mm-hmm.
It's another word for awareness, or the God even is a way of saying that.
Mm-hmm.
So Ram Dass taught methods for how to find that place of letting go into the ocean of love.
Mm-hmm.
And he was oriented around lots of Hindu teachings as well as Buddhist teachings, but steeped in Western psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And his work is it's available now. If you look up Ram Dass on YouTube, his lectures are there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a foundation that supporting his teachings and so forth. So he was a wonderful teacher. And, I had the good fortune in maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, just before he passed, to have a one-on-one conversation with him on Zoom, and it was amazing.
Yeah.
After knowing him for all of these years and just being in his presence again, you could see and feel and this is through, he was in Hawaii, I was in New York, and we were, communicating like this.
Mm-hmm.
You could feel the energy.
I can
You
imagine.
could feel how his quality of emptiness, and at the same time present, giving, compassionate.
Yeah. That's incredible to have teachers like that. And I really admire you and the teachings and the work that you're doing and the good that you're spreading in the world, and through writing your book and through the courses that you do and the people that you coach, and this is just such good work, because there's so many people living with anxiety and worry and obsessive thinking and just living in fight or flight, not even knowing that that's their way of being.
Yeah.
I used to live there. I'm coming out of that, and I think part of that's just the aging process, right?
Yes and no. I think aging helps to
Mm-hmm.
some degree because we become more cognizant of the fact that we don't have so much time left. So, why spend it worrying?
Right.
But it also requires a mindset
Mm-hmm.
that is based on the knowledge that you're going to get over this,
Right.
and that much of the things that we worry about are just made up. They don't have any relevance.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there in the future, and they may or may not occur, but spending time now worrying about them, not so clever.
Right.
There's another quote, I think it's in the book, that says, I'll just go, do what you can, let go, and be happy.
Yeah.
Something that's not,
Yeah.
it's not the actual quote, but it's to that. But the first part of it, do what you can.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's the first step. Take the first step.
Yeah.
Yep.
But this notion of age being a factor in wisdom, it is a factor, but by itself, I know people who are in their 80s and and are miserable.
Me too. Yeah.
And
Definitely not. It's not the end all for it. It's just
right.
you have to do the inside work, that internal work, and not focus so much on the external. So there's probably there's a lot of younger listeners on our podcast, and I think this whole anxiety and loneliness and all the things that are going on in the world right now, it's something that is got their minds obsessing about some things. So what would you say to, obviously I'm going to recommend that they get the Peaceful Warrior's Path workbook, to start working through some of that, understanding what they're attached to, understanding themselves, gaining more self-awareness, mindfulness, learning about what their belief systems are. But what would be the tips that you would just give to them about, let's say they have this monkey mind, this confused mind that is really focused a lot on obsessive thinking?
Well, that's it's kind of an easy thing to. Well, it's not easy, but it's a straightforward. There's a straightforward way to deal with monkey mind, And that is to cultivate a mindfulness meditation practice. There may be other ways as well, but
Mm-hmm.
the one that I recommend, which is available to anyone,
Mm-hmm.
is to cultivate that kind of practice, which takes a quality of mind, mindfulness, that everyone has,
Mm-hmm.
and cultivates it to the degree that it increases so that it becomes a normal, recognizable, conscious part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, one can now see the monkey mind operating. And there's a saying in meditation circles that at first, when you start meditating, when you start observing your mind, it's like being in a waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see anything other than the water cascading down and so forth. But now you start to step back a little bit. Your mindfulness starts to increase, and you now have the experience of being in a rushing river with rapids and so forth. Still, you're disturbed by the rapids and all of that, but it's not like being in the waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
Then you keep practicing, and over time, the river calms down, and you're now in a much more open river. You can see the banks.
Mm-hmm.
You're not any longer thrashing and flailing to avoid the rocks and what have you. And eventually, that river empties into the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long does it take to go from waterfall to rapids to wide open river to ocean? It depends. So don't be in a hurry. Accept the fact that monkey mind is there.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think that your meditation practice or your skillful living is terrible because the monkey mind is there. Monkey mind is there because that's the way you've grown up. That's your current condition.
Mm-hmm.
So you accept that. Back to this idea of accepting. You let go, and then you get into the flow of cultivating the quality of mind that will allow you to not stop the mind, but allow the mind to stop.
Mm-hmm.
You don't stop monkey mind. You don't stop obsessive thinking. The
No,
more you
that
try,
what
the
you
worse it
resist,
gets.
what you resist persists, right? It's
Exactly.
like pushing
Exactly.
a balloon under the water. It's just going to
Yes.
want to come back up. So it's noticing, you're saying, taking the time to slow down, pay attention, breathe, create
Exactly.
space. And I think we're all in this habit of, in the society we live in, of rushing around, hurrying. And sometimes it's just being intentional about slowing down
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
checking out, like checking in with ourselves.
Yeah. And when we say slowing down, some people say, well, I can't, I have this job and I have this, family and all of this stuff. I can't slow down. Well, sometimes slowing down is an internal thing, as you say. It's the internal process. So
Mm-hmm.
we're slowing down internally, and the external could still be going fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Many people have had that kind of experience where, for some reason or another, they've been able to, in effect, stop time.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is just happening
Mm-hmm.
speedily,
Mm-hmm.
but it's as though there was no time going by.
Right. Yeah, that's a good perspective because when you're peaceful, it's being peaceful in the storm, right? Even when things
Yes.
are in chaos around you, when you can get centered and slow down and recognize. One of the things that I check on myself when I feel like I'm in the middle of one of those storms is I'm just, I've been through this before. I try to recognize things I've overcome before. I recognize patterns. I've been through this. Oh, I've done harder things than this. It's not the end of the world. Like, I really try to notice what's going on and then tell myself, I can do this. I've done way harder things than this. Like, even if worst case scenario, sometimes I have to take myself to worst case scenario. Worst case scenario, if I'm going to go speak on this stage, is that they hate me and they'll throw tomatoes. Okay. Then all of a
Yeah,
sudden I'm not afraid of it anymore or tripping
yeah,
or whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Right?
That's a great technique. It's really recognizing that you're making up something into the future,
Yeah.
and you're catastrophizing.
Uh-huh.
And when you realize even if the catastrophe took place, you'd be able to handle it.
I'd still live, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
just yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you would be able to go on.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of stories in the book or references to things. There's one where Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist, has
Mm-hmm.
a string break in the middle of a performance,
Mm-hmm.
and he calmly steps back, gets the string fixed, and carries on.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen, Olympic skaters
Mm-hmm.
fall, get back up, and get right back into the process of whatever performance they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of quality that we want to develop. We call it the being in the calm center,
Mm-hmm.
the center of the storm.
Yeah.
And uh, part of that begins with a belief, a
Mm-hmm.
useful belief that there is a center to the storm,
Right.
that we do have a calm center that is always available to us.
Mm-hmm.
And when we first take that on as a belief, and then we start to see that either because of the belief or because it's actually there, it starts to manifest itself in
Mm-hmm.
our life
Mm-hmm.
in a much more natural way until it becomes just part of us.
Mm-hmm.
We integrate
Yeah.
that. And the more we can do that, the more we become free of reactivity,
Mm-hmm.
the more we become responsive,
Yeah.
coming from that calm center, from
Right.
that place of inner peace.
Mm-hmm. Where you can react with compassion or respond with compassion and love and
Yes,
kindness.
yes,
When we react, we're usually reacting out of ego or out of fear or out of, and so we don't show up as our best selves. Uh,
yes, exactly.
yeah.
So that becomes another theme that we want to be responsive
Mm-hmm.
and not reactive.
Yeah.
Now, part of the anxiety, you mentioned before that, we're living at a time where if you're not anxious about it, there's something wrong with you. uh, so it's basically what we have to do is recognize that anxiety is present.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. We don't want to deny it.
Mm-hmm.
And pushing it away, as you say, is like pushing a balloon under the water.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to come back up, or even worse, they'll stay under and start to cause us,
Health.
physical
Yeah.
problems,
Yeah.
health problems.
Yeah.
What we want to be able to do is recognize that the anxiety is there because we care.
Mm-hmm.
Political anxiety, ecological anxiety, and so forth. Uh, it's there.
Mm-hmm.
So now we accept the fact that it's there,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to do something that we call transforming the emotions. How can we take this energy that we label as anxiety and transform it into some kind of useful action,
Mm-hmm.
some means for perhaps avoiding some future disaster?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So we can relax. We learn relaxation techniques to give us the ability in the moment just to calm down.
Mm-hmm.
And that in and of itself, even if we don't buy into anything else, just the ability to have techniques that will allow us to manage our emotions effectively,
Mm-hmm.
to calm down when we're faced with anxiety or fear or whatever the emotion is.
Mm-hmm.
And these breathing techniques, different meditation techniques,
Yep.
they all work.
Yeah. Stimulating that vagus nerve and
Yes,
right, and then having the body actually follow that.
exactly. And even taking medication.
Mm-hmm.
There are anti-anxiety medication, antidepressant medications. I'm saying that if that's what you need to calm down, and you recognize the negative effects of it and the positive, and you make a conscious choice to skillfully use the substance, the whatever kind of medication that you're using, you use it skillfully. That's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are some practices that could help not even have to take the medication if you put these things into practice and
Absolutely.
be noticing and stimulate your vagus nerve and recognize that anxiety is fear. So what are you afraid of? What is
Exactly.
scaring you? What are the thoughts that you're having that are, ruminating in your head, and really kind of shine some light on those, which is scary, but also
Yeah.
helpful to put light on them and to share them with someone and to get them out of you. And so they're not just inside your body creating dis-ease equals disease, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
when we're talking about wellness, I think it's important to recognize that our emotions and how those are how we handle those impact our overall wellness. Our emotion, right? And that's one
Yes.
of the pillars, the eight pieces, right? Is our
Yes.
emotional, how we handle those emotions. So I love that we're having these important talks, and I really recommend the Peaceful Warriors Path. We're at the point in the podcast where I want to ask you 3 things that you wish that you knew, your younger self knew. The wisdom if you could go back and tell yourself right now, what would you tell yourself?
3 things. There's so many of them.
Yeah. Or you could go with a couple. It doesn't have to be 3, but
Yeah,
a couple.
well, one thing I I came to this system that I'm proposing in the book in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So starting in the early 1970s. I wish that I had started when I was like 12.
Mm-hmm.
To recognize, to be introduced to yogic practices, mindfulness meditation practices, mindset, the idea that we are subject to a mindset that we have control over.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if I had anything, that would be, the one thing that I would wish had happened earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, wishing that it happened earlier, I don't want to be attached to that. I don't want to say, oh, too bad it didn't happen earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But that, you asked the question, what would I wish? That's one
Mm-hmm.
thing. And I wish it not just for myself, because it's too late for me at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm totally blessed with the fact that it happened when I was in my 30s.
Mm-hmm.
I wish that our education system was such that it would cultivate this kind of knowledge, this kind of technique, and give it to children. I taught 3rd graders how to meditate,
Mm-hmm.
and they
Good.
got it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So that kind of thing, I think, is something I wish that I had had, but now I wish that goes off into the future that others have. I wish that I had found a better way to cultivate my yogic and meditation practices without leaving a potentially multi-million-dollar business that I was a principal.
Mm-hmm.
So on a financial level, I could have been, like a multi-millionaire,
Mm-hmm.
as were some of my partners. But
Mm-hmm.
I was a crazed hippie, and I said, okay. Let me get out of here and do something else. And I'm happy that I did that, because if I didn't, who knows what would have happened.
Right.
So that kind of thing, I don't know. It's I don't usually think that way.
Yeah.
I don't go back and say, oh, I wish this had happened or wish that had happened.
Mm-hmm.
But those 2 things probably are the highlight.
Yeah.
And I know that both of them couldn't have happened.
Right.
Because if they could have happened, they would have happened.
Yeah. What happened happened, and it couldn't have happened any other way because it didn't.
Exactly.
Right?
And I'm quite happy with the fact that that it turned out the way it turned out.
Yeah. It's just something to put out there for our listeners to just think about. Looking at people's life backward when they can see it, it's helpful for, I think, for younger people to hear that, and especially the people that are seeking. They're coming to listen to this,
Yes.
and they're wanting to know the wisdom, and they want people that have wisdom to share, and have cultivated a life that they love, and and they look up to. So I appreciate your time, and I thank you for being on the podcast and for writing this book. Um, and the book is available on Amazon. I don't know if it's available on Audible, but I do recommend the hard copy because there's so many exercises to do, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, hard copy would be my recommendation as well. But it is available electronic,
Okay.
in Kindle and
Yeah.
what have you. And also, it is not available yet on Audible.
Okay.
I haven't, taken the time or
Yeah.
expense to make that happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's just a pleasure having you. And thank you to our listeners. Like I said, I highly recommend this workbook. I think it will change the way you see yourself and the way you see others, and will help you live more optimally. And I just thank you for listening and appreciate it. Thank you for listening.